Welcome, distance learners. Today we're going to go through our lab equipment, general lab equipment. It's their names and their uses. So you should have a sheet of paper. You're going to label these A through Z, and then there's some double letters because we have a few more products that are there. So we'll start off with letter A. A is a basic 150 milliliter beaker. Beakers are great for holding solids and liquids. They are not great for measurements, even though they do have numbers on the side. Those are going to be rough estimates. So this is the 150 milliliter beaker, glass beaker. If it hits the ground, it's likely to break, so be careful with those. Letter B is one of our 3 sets of tongs. You can see that it has rubber on it, so we call these beaker tongs. The rubber is used to allow for better grip, so if you're picking up things like beakers, it does a good job with that. Keep these out of the Bunsen burner because rubber will burn in those. So these are what they call beaker tongs, letter B. Letter C is going to be one of our graduated cylinders. This particular one is 25 milliliters. We have different variations, sizes 50, 100, 10. So this is letter C. It's used for its purpose is to measure liquids very well. These are what you want to use if you want exact measurements. So this is letter C, graduated cylinder. You can see we have the plastic on the top that's for when they tip over and allows a good chance of not breaking. Letter D is next. We call this a burette or test tube clamp of sorts. Sometimes they'll be placed on in holding a burette or a glass tube. Its job or function is to hold those in place off of a ring stand, and we'll get to that letter later. So this is letter D, burette clamp. Letter E comes next. These are pipettes. Our plastic pipettes, really good. Its function is to take liquids and move them from one container to the next. It's also a great way to find yourself in in-school suspension if you're going to use them for shooting liquids at other people. So generally what we do is you squeeze the ball, place it under the liquid, release it, it can pick up liquid. So if you're trying to measure carefully, maybe with your graduated cylinder, you need to get an exact amount, taking little bits of liquid in and out. That's letter E, that's a plastic pipette. Letter F comes next. It does not look like your resource sheet. This is called a spatula. Sometimes I'll refer to it as a scoopula because you're scooping up material. So if you have baking soda or salt, you may need to scoop up small amounts of it and transport it from one place to the next. That's letter F. It's silvery. It has a little different shape than what your particular one would have on the data sheet. But this is called a spatula, used to pick up solids and transport them. Letter G comes next. That's the ring stand itself. Here's the ring. The stand itself is a metal pole. We can apply the ring to the ring stand later, but this is letter G, generally used to hold things. The ring stand itself, the ring generally to put Bunsen burners over the top of it. So this is letter G. This is the ring stand. So that's, we'll come back to the ring itself later. So after G comes H. H is our striker. This is letter H. This particular one does not have the flint in it, but what you'll do is light Bunsen burners with these particular things. You'll squeeze them, it'll create sparks, and those sparks can light the Bunsen burner that we'll get to later. But these are found or used for lighting Bunsen burners. That's letter H. Striker is its name. We skipped I for some reason. It doesn't exist, so you notice that we go from H to K on the list, if you have a list in front of you or if you're going through. So letter K is the next one that we have on our list. This particular one is called a test tube cleaner. Some of you are unfamiliar with this term, what it means to clean things. So what we look at is it's for taking a test tube, it's cleaning the inside of it. It's basically a brush or a scrub that we can use. And we have different sizes of these, different thicknesses, but this is letter K, test tube brush. Going backwards in the alphabet, we have letter J. This is a rubber hose. This particular one is used to connect our Bunsen burners, which we'll get to later, to our gas sources. So sometimes they're also used to connect, if you have rubber hoses are used to connect if you're creating gases in an beaker or Erlenmeyer flask. You're going to use these to create, perhaps transport gases from one place to the next. But generally what we're using our rubber hoses for is to attach them to our gas source. So that's letter J, that's a rubber hose. Now the alphabet goes back to normal. We're at L. This is one of our two what we call tongs. This kind of looks like a hot dog picker-upper tongs, just generally used to pick up materials, to hold things. So this is one of our general tongs. This is letter L. You can kind of see the shape of it. Looks like something you use for grilling. So after L, we have M coming up next. This is a larger graduated cylinder. So letter M is a 50 milliliter graduated cylinder. So the numbers going up the side, we'll talk about this later in the year, but basically you can't assume that each line is worth 1 milliliter. They're a lot of times worth fractions of those. So this is for a little larger volume. This is a 50 milliliter letter M graduated cylinder. Letter N is coming up next. These are sometimes called tweezers. They're described as forceps in your list, used to pick up materials to squeeze if we need to pull things apart. So forceps, or sometimes just commonly known as tweezers, letter N. Moving on to O, we have another set of tongs. Again, the shape is slightly different. This particular one, you can see maybe has a narrower end to it, opposed to the letter L. So it depends on which drawer you have and what we need them for. So letter O is another pair of tongs that we use to pick up materials in our lab. Moving on to letter P. Letter P is one of our, we would refer to as a test tube. This is the smaller diameter test tube. Test tubes are used to either hold solids and heat them, or to have liquids in here and heat them as well. So this is a smaller diameter. We'll get to the rack that it's being held in here later. But this is letter P, small diameter test tube. Letter Q is next, and that's the actual ring itself for the ring stand. So this particular one we can see here has a smaller diameter. It's allowed to be placed onto the stand itself. We can adjust the height by moving it up and down. You can place products directly on top of it, or many times we'll put something else, which will get to the wire mesh. But that's Q, that's the ring for the ring stand, is letter Q. Letter R is the test tube rack itself. Most of ours are made out of wood. They have different size diameter openings. So the top is for the smaller diameter, the bottom is for the larger diameter, as we're looking at them. Obviously, if you have a round object like a test tube, if you place them on the counter itself, it has a chance to roll off and break. So it's a great way to hold multiple test tubes and keep them safe. And then also, this particular one, it has a place that when you clean them, you can flip them upside down and hold them for drying as well. So some of those have that feature. So that's letter R, that's a test tube rack. Letter S comes next, test tube holder. In this case, it's a clamp, letter S. What you do is you squeeze it, it opens up, and then when you release it, it squeezes back down. Again, the clamp itself then can allow us to hold the test tube without having to keep your fingers closed. A lot of times used for heating products over the Bunsen burner with this particular setup, so you don't hold the hot test tube itself, but you're actually holding the clamp. A little bit better than tongs, because with tongs, if you hold on to them, it could squirt out, or if you're not paying attention and you open up your tongs, then the test tubes could fall. So this is a test tube clamp or test tube holder. It's letter S on our list. Letter T is crucible with cover. This one's a very tiny one, made of porcelain or glass. Basically, the lid would come off. You can put some materials in here, either liquids or solids, and heat them over the Bunsen burner. Notice with the ring stand, it wouldn't fit, so we're going to need something later called wire mesh to hold that in. But this is a crucible. It has a lid that can come off and will heat products over the Bunsen burner in that. So it's letter T, crucible with cover or lid. U is next, as we're looking at them. And here's our letter U. This is a 400 milliliter beaker. Again, it's a larger diameter beaker. If you can see on the bottom here, this one has a crack in it. If you're working in lab, we'd obviously want you not to use this particular one. Let a teacher know, and we'll take it out of circulation. A little bit larger. This particular one does a nice job of actually telling us on the side it's plus or minus 5%. Or in other words, it's telling you I'm really bad at measuring by 5%. It can be 5% above or below the actual value it says on the side. So they just stamp those values on the side of the glass beaker, which makes them not as accurate as a graduated cylinder for measurement. But if you just need a rough estimate, beakers are okay for. So beakers, 400 milliliter, holding solids and liquids. for ourselves. Letter V is next. We have mortar and pestle. So in this case, the pestle is the this particular device. The mortar is the bull itself. What you end up doing is placing solids in here, and you can crush them or grind them into a powder. So if you need to have things react faster, usually more surface area or in a powder form is better. Sometimes we'll say in my class that your hopes and dreams go in here, and we crush them a little bit with your mortar and pestle. So that's letter V, mortar and pestle, taking solids, grinding them up into a powder. So that's its job or function. Letter W is a stopper, a rubber stopper. These are used for beakers or to place in the top of beakers so you can seal them up. So if you need to keep your liquid from evaporating or spilling, that's one possibility is a rubber stopper. Larger rubber stoppers can also be used in this Erlenmeyer flask, which we'll get to later. But rubber stoppers, various diameters or sizes of those, used to basically seal up the lids of glass containers. Letter X is next. It's an evaporating dish. This one again is made of porcelain. It's similar to the material that you'd find in your we saw earlier here. So as we're looking at these letter X, this is an evaporating dish. You place liquids inside of here, heats really nicely, has a large diameter opening, so liquids can be driven off, and you'll be left behind with whatever solid is left behind. So again, mainly they aren't gonna fit inside of your ring stands, so we're gonna need a device that we'll get to later, which is called the wire mesh that will be useful. But this is an evaporating dish. They come in various sizes to basically evaporate, usually using heat. So that's letter X. Letter Y is your safety glasses, not to be confused with safety goggles. Glasses provide some sort of protection. They don't seal on top or bottom, so they're for when we have labs that have perhaps a little less danger in them. So if we tell you to wear your safety glasses or goggles, those are two different things, but these are safety glasses. Those are super cool. Everyone looks awesome in safety glasses. No one looks uncool in them. So that's Y. Letter Z is next. It's a watch glass. Again, what it is just a piece of glass. It's concave. What you can do is put liquids in here and evaporate off small amounts of liquid if you're going to be using them kind of like an evaporating dish. They are sometimes used as small lids over beakers as well, just so that material doesn't fall in. It doesn't seal a beaker, but that's another option for a watch glass. So this is letter Z, watch glass, primarily used to evaporate small amounts of liquid. Now we go to our double letters. First one is the double letter A. This is our Bunsen burner. Some people are super excited to use these, other people are terrified of them. Basically, it's a device that allows us to heat materials by using our gas, and it's connected with our rubber hose. You'll light it, and the flame will project out the top of it. We'll look later at how to change the gas and change the amount of oxygen available as well. The Bunsen burners is our way that we can use burners to heat products in chemistry in the chemistry lab. So those are Bunsen burners. That's double A for that. Double B is wire gauze. We've been mentioned it before, but it's wonderful to place on your ring stand itself. This particular one, if you can see, that has some white material on it, what it'll do is diffuse or push the flame off to the sides. The flame doesn't come directly up through, so your glassware doesn't get touched by the flame, but the heat is there. It does a nice job of kind of filling in the hole for the ring stand to give it maybe a more stable place to place your beakers or whatever you're heating on top of here. Be careful with wire mesh. They do a great job of heat transfer, so they heat up really quickly, and if you were to pick them up when it's still hot, you'll have a really neat mesh pattern on your fingertips, and a great sizzling sound that goes along with it. So be careful with wire mesh. They are hot when you're using them. So a good example is using beaker tongs to remove those. Double C, so letter C is our larger beaker. This is going up to 600 milliliters. Again, our beakers, great for holding materials like liquids and solids, not so great at measurement. So they're getting larger and smaller, but this is 600 milliliter beaker. Letter D, two Ds here. In this case, we have our pinch clamp. If you were using your rubber hose, perhaps to allow liquid to pass through, not gases out of our gas valve, but perhaps liquids, from one container to another. What it can do is you can actually place them on, and it'll squeeze and close shut the actual rubber hose itself. So it's a hose clamp that you'll see. So that's letter D, D. Letter EE is going to be a large test tube. Again, same function as the small test tube, but you may need more materials. With our test tube rack here, we can place it in the lower area. So we have large diameter or large test tube, and we have small diameter test tube. So that's letter EE. Getting close, we have letter PP. This is a glass stirring rod used for obviously stirring materials. It is glass, it is round. If we're not paying attention, it will roll off the countertop and break. So keep close eye on your glass stirring rods. Basically, if you need to mix or stir up your liquids, if you have trying to create a solution, you can use glass stirring rods. They're quite useful for that. Two more left. We have XX. This is the Erlenmeyer flask. It is similar to a beaker. It's related to a beaker. It has a wide bottom, and then it narrows down to the top. Its job or function is to hold liquids. If you had a larger diameter rubber stopper, it can do a good job of sealing the top, or if you put a piece of plastic over the top, it does a nice job of storing liquids. You can stir up or agitate it, or it does a really nice job with a larger surface area. You can heat the material if it's a liquid, and then it can boil water in there. But you have to be careful of heating liquids in your Erlenmeyer flask. That's double X. Lastly is double Z. This is also used in the ring stand. It's a triangle shape, so we call it a pipe stem triangle. Its job or function is to be used on the ring stand. It allows us to place objects on there, and instead of maybe using wire mesh, you can place things like an evaporating dish over the top of it. It allows you to hold that in place and allow some flame to come up or heat to come up, and ultimately heat things like your evaporating dish, which would be very hot if you're heating it. So we've just gone through letters A through double Z. Again, what you should know is its name and its general function or purpose, so that when you're in lab, you understand and know what's going on. Thank you.